About a year ago, exactly 1 year ago, on the first Sunday in January of 2020, I gave the talk that I had planned to give in November. You may remember that in November, I whacked my head on the hatch of my car and I had to go to the emergency room for stitches rather than coming to St. Croix Falls. Anyway, on that Sunday a year ago, we discussed social justice, what it means for a congregation to engage together rather than in our own individual ways. And after the service, we had a meeting of folks who wanted to engage in justice work. We put sticky paper up on the walls and did some brainstorming work to find out where love and justice are calling us in the world. There were many different ideas. You folks are attuned to the injustices of the world, and it was no trouble finding ideas to come up with. And then we narrowed them down into a couple of buckets. The two main areas that seemed ripe for the most attention were the climate crisis and economic inequality, big topics. After that session, a couple of meetings were held to begin thinking about how the work might be shaped. It was a slow start, intentionally, so that groups could have time to meet and discuss the issues, how we might craft a response together, etc. I had planned to revisit the topic in April of last year, and then COVID hit. You may remember that around March 15th, we all went inside, went behind our masks, and there was no more in-person gathering. So here we are, 1 year later. The world is both beautiful and broken, as are we. What a gift it is to be alive in this world that is so full of beauty and of pain. The world, our planet, our local community are still so in need of prophetic words and actions from each of us individually and from organizations, including this congregation. And you are clamoring for it. A couple of months ago, we talked about what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist, what it means to be a member of this congregation. And we shared that what this fellowship means to us. But as we did this, some of us felt the underlying question. Are we just self-referential? Are we important only to those of us who find this beloved community? Or are we important to the world? What difference do we make in the world? And if it were easy, we would have already found the path, built the alliances, taken the actions, and saved the world, right? We know what needs to be done, don't we? So why haven't we done it? Well, first of all, justice is rarely simple or easily achieved. It is the complexity of issues that can be overwhelming. And indeed, a year ago, many of you were concerned that our efforts would fall victim to analysis paralysis. I'm being distracted again by my dog who's trying to tip over my ring light. So if I rush off the screen, that's what's happening.
You're muted.
Thank you. Activist Kimberly Crenshaw gave us the term intersectionality, by which she meant that one's identities are not singular. When discussing the issues that face an economically disadvantaged Black woman, for example, Dr. Crenshaw said that one could not just see her as Black, as a woman, as poor. It was the intersection of those issues that multiply her challenges in societies. I posit that it's the same with any social justice issue. Take the climate crisis, for example. If we're going to work on that as a as a social justice issue, do we deal first with carbon emissions or the companies that keep pulling fossil fuels out of the ground, or money in politics that makes for a continually unlevel playing field, or voter suppression, or gerrymandering, or the people whose human rights are at risk because of climate injustice? It's exhausting just to think about it. It is true that justice work can be a grind, and our small efforts can feel like they're not impactful at all. And yet it can also be enormously rewarding for organizations and for individuals who may see us as a beacon of light doing some work in an area where other people are not doing it. Do you remember how it feels to win on an issue? Think of marriage equality. 15 years ago, no one thought that marriage equality, well, not no one, most people didn't think that marriage equality would pass. It's too soon, the country's not ready for it. But the activists who were focused on marriage equality, equality for people who are gay and lesbian and other expressions of sexuality to be married in this country, they said this is a constitutional right and we will find the way. And conversation by conversation, little bit by little bit, strategy by strategy, task by task, and goal by goal, now we have marriage equality in this country. Even though it was huge, and even though there is still quite a bit of backlash to it, it is the law of the land. The law says that marriage equality is constitutional. To be on the winning side of that issue and to feel like we had taken part in it was huge. But make no mistake that in small rural areas where there is less ability to be open and out than there might be in a metro area, to be a place that says we affirm people who are LGBTQ plus is life-saving. And so on big issues, we can have an impact in our way, in our more rural setting than in a big city. A question that I think often comes up for me is, why do this in a congregation as opposed to individually? So a question that I often ask myself at First Unitarian Society and here at SCOOF is, are you coming to get your bucket filled and or to get ideas of how to work in community? Many of you are working in nonprofits already. For your day work, you work in nonprofits, and that can be a grind too. And yet you're serving your communities. You're serving your particular constituency. You're keeping the library going. You're working on various issues in your town and in the state and so on. It can be a grind, and it can also be enormously rewarding. You may not be coming to our congregational setting to say, I need something else to do. You might, but you're already doing some things and you may need to get your bucket filled. Many of you are working on climate issues and economic injustice and other things with other organizations. You may be looking to do something more collective here, or you may want to just get your spiritual, soulful, inspirational bucket filled. And others of you may think, what is it that we can do collectively that we are called to? What are we called to as an organization? Do we have a role to play in making our voices heard on issues in the town, in the county, in the state? Who is speaking for progressive issues in our area of the state, either in Wisconsin or in Minnesota, both sides of the river? What is our role in being the minority voice in a very conservative area? And how do we want our electeds to hear from us? What is our role in creating coalition with organizations that are working on voting rights, that are working on anti-racism, those different things? There are groups that are working on it. How do we benefit internally and the world externally as we work on that? There are a couple of pieces of why congregations that are progressive work toward justice. My definition of justice is to be in right relation. To be in right relation. That sounds pretty simple, but if I have a lot and others have very little, that's not a right relation to me. If I am treated one way by law enforcement and other people are treated differently, that's not right relationship. There's something askew or amiss. When I boil it down to how are we in right relationship to the larger community, that helps me think about justice. Many of you come from Protestant and Catholic traditions. There are two pieces of scripture that I want to lift up. And one from the Older Testament, the prophet Micah, who said, "What does the Lord require of you, but that you do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God." Now, I may not have a great deal of tether to the Older Testament in terms of the belief structure of Yahweh, of the chosen people. The commandments may or may not mean a great deal to me, but this scripture to me is so primary that I will not let go of it. What are we required to do but to do justice, to love mercy, and to be humble in the world? That's my humanist take on that, and to make it my own. What are we required to do but to do justice, to make justice, to love mercy, kindness, compassion, empathy, and to be humble in the face of the powers that both uphold and oppress? How can we be in right relation with those powers? In the Newer Testament, it's the social gospel came out of, in some ways, the Sermon on the Mount and the Beatitudes, and the wish to be upright and to fight the oppression of empire. Make no mistake, Jesus was a radical who preached against the empire of Rome. Again, I may not have a strong tether to Christianity, but I do have a very strong tether to the justice that is proclaimed in the Newer Testament. So that's one reason that congregations, particularly Protestant congregations who were enlivened by the social gospel movement, that's one reason why we may wish to agree and engage in this. Theologian Frederick Buechner said that the sweet spot for us in spiritual life is where our gladness meets the world's deep hunger. Where our gladness, our gifts to the world, meet the world's deep hunger. The world is so hungry for a word of justice, for the actions of justice. And then what? What can we imagine about what sort of difference can we make? there are lots of things we can do. We can meet and talk about issues. We can advocate with our elected officials. We can join with other organizations. We can continue giving money to food shelves, helping people who are economically disadvantaged. There are many things that we can do. We can work with climate justice organizations. We can protest. We can write letters. We can give money. There are all sorts of pieces that we can do. And as some of you know, if one person says, let's do it, and the congregation is not ready to do it, it won't happen. So my sense is that the need and the want to do this needs to come from the congregation to do something in a larger sense. And then as your minister and the steering committee and we can reconstitute a social justice team, we can help shape that to move it forward.